Today is July 31st, 2019, and we are speaking with Phoebe Suina from Cochiti and San Felipe Pueblos, located north of Albuquerque. We are joined by our videographer, Dr. Beverly Singer, and our project assistants, Jonna Payton and Valerie Fernando. The interview is being conducted by Rose Diaz, IPCC project coordinator, and in addition, we have some of Ms. Suina's interns here with us. Thank you for coming and joining us today, and welcome.
You're welcome.
We're honored to hear your story and, of course, about your many experiences. To begin the interview, I'd like to share a bit of your background. Ms. Suina is the owner of High Watermark, a majority Native American woman-owned environmental company with specialties in water resources engineering and science planning and management. A community-based business, it services pueblos, local, and federal agencies with an aim to rehabilitate and protect cultural and natural resources. She attended schools in Rio Rancho before graduating from the Albuquerque Academy, where she was a star athlete. Her undergraduate and graduate work were completed from 1998 to 2001, graduating with an engineering management degree from the prestigious Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth. In her career, she has been affiliated with the U.S. Department of Energy and Los Alamos National Laboratory. In 2016, she graduated from the executive level training program sponsored by the Small Business Administration. Ms. Suina's volunteer efforts include board service with the Economic Development Board at Cochiti Pueblo and the Western Lands Trust Initiative. She and her partner, Rex Carice, have two young children, Marshall and Melanie, and live in an area between Santo Domingo and Cochiti. And I hope I got most of that right.
Yes, you did.
I'd like to start by asking you about your young life, who your parents are, your growing up years.
Oh, sorry. It's taking me a minute to hear all that description. And, the last part about my family is like what I'm most happy about.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start back. My parents were married I got to go back to my dad. And so he was a Vietnam War vet. He was what they call a point man. Point men are ones he had a dog, that mine and booby trap dog handler. My dad was, and so in Vietnam he was one of the guys. They called them point men. Point men are the ones that jump off the chopper in near enemy territory, and then he doesn't have a platoon of his own, so he has to go and find a platoon. And I just shared this part because it leads into kind of my childhood. When Dad came home, he was on enemy lines territory, and then hanging out in Vietnam, with only his dog in the jungle many nights. Eventually, I found out later that the group of point men that he served with, they told me he was the point man of the point men. He was the guy that if a platoon had to make it through the jungle or somebody had to find the platoon, they'd send Dad out. So him and his dog would go out. So Dad saw a lot of action. So when he came back, he had to get back into life. Well, there's my mom, his high school sweetheart. And so when he came home, I happened. And so they got married, and my mom and Dad moved up to Cochiti Pueblo. So they got married in a traditional format in the Catholic Church. When I was born, he was a stay-at-home father. And so my mom was the one that actually went back to work. She worked at San Diego National Laboratory as an administrative assistant. I was initially raised by my dad as my mom went back to work. And so I have a really strong connection to my father.
What were their names?
Oh, Donald Suina and Diana Suina are my mom and dad. About when I was 2 or 3, we moved into Rio Rancho. When Rio Rancho wasn't booming, it was just a small community, kind of a suburb of Albuquerque, but it's not what Rio Rancho is today. It was just a few homes, as I recall. My dad really wanted to be at Cochiti, so unfortunately my parents divorced through legal means to have a divorce. So I was raised by my mom, single mom. I should also mention my dad's mom and father, my grandparents. I always call my grandma the grandma of the grandmas. She was a very special lady. Her name was Phoebe Suina. Very loving. You come to the house and walk up and under the porch, she's like this. She was ready for a hug, welcoming. And so I was blessed to have my dad and my dad's side of the family. My mom's side from San Felipe, Pueblo. My grandma was a single mom, and she raised 4 children, 4 girls. San Felipe, a very traditional community. So my grandma on my mom's side, my mom's mom, she had a very hard life raising 4 young girls on her own. And I share all that because it goes into how my mom really encouraged education. So when we moved to Rio Rancho, she enrolled me in the public schools there. I was a young kid, and I heard Karis from the ages of 0 to about 2 or 3. But when we moved into Rio Rancho, I heard it very, very infrequent. And so I went to the public schools. English education. So from the age about 2 or 3, I just spoke English. I guess I was a very quiet child, which is different now. I'm not as quiet. I actually found out after the fact, because I was so quiet, I actually have friends that were hard of hearing, and I learned sign language when I was younger because I have friends that are hard of hearing. But I like to not talk, and part of it, I think, was because I came from a Karis community speaking English, but then when I went back to the community, I was made fun of because I spoke with a different accent, like non-Karis accent, I should say. So I didn't speak very well. So I stopped speaking Karis when I was a little girl. My mom, she actually worked at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center for many years, and then she went on to be administrative assistant at Sandia National Laboratories. Very much education minded. She got, I think, an associate's degree from the Highlands University. And so she really thought and encouraged me to get into school education. I loved math, and I loved science. English, and I loved to read, but English, I didn't like writing and so forth, but I loved math. I went to Pueblo del Sol, which is now a Catholic school in Rio Rancho, so the Pueblo del Sol moved to another facility. So that's kind of how I started public education in Rio Rancho. And I had some great teachers. And again, my mom, she was a single mom. Dad lived in Cochiti, Pueblo. I would see him every now and then. And like I said, I'm daddy's girl. To this day, I'm a daddy's girl. So I'm an only child, but I have a number of cousins on both sides of my families. No ways did I ever feel like an only child. I always had my extended family, and even now, my first cousins, I refer to them as my brothers and sisters, and that's how we were raised, and that's how we were brought up. I was alone, with my mom. She sacrificed a lot for me, and she supported my education. She always made sure I had a roof over my head and a safe place, a safe home. I owe a lot to my mom in that manner.
What are your most vivid recollections of Cochiti or San Felipe? When you think of them, what do you think of?
For San Felipe, it's the traditions, the dances. My grandma, she was a conservative traditionalist. So meaning that she really was focused on language and on the culture. She had a particular role at the Pueblo, and that's all I can really share at this point. Because of that, she, was very strict. My grandma on my mom's side was very strict, so I get a lot of my traditional strictness from her. When I would stay with her, like over the summer times when school was out, I would go there for a month to San Felipe and then go to Cochiti for a month. Or vice versa, or half and half. We tried to do half and half, but I learned a lot from my grandma at San Felipe. So when I think of San Felipe, I think of my grandma. I think of all the dances that occur and traditional activities that occur throughout the year at San Felipe, and the river. My grandma's house is very close to the main rivers, and there was always that, for me, what San Felipe reminds me of. And again, being very traditionalistic, Pueblo, in terms of the governance and in terms of how the societies and the everyday life was. And for Cochiti, it's all about the mountains. The house that we lived in when I was a baby until I was 2 or 3 and my dad lived in afterwards, it was built by my grandfather and his brothers. So it's one of those old adobe homes that was family built. And there's a certain feel in that home, even today. And, you know, we don't use it on a daily basis, but when you go in there, it has a different feel. So for me, Cochiti is about my grandma there too. She was very welcoming. And then our family at Cochiti, extended family. My grandma and my grandpa were on my grandpa's side. His name was Crescencio Suina. He was one of 3 brothers from one family that married one of 3 sisters from another family. I have extended families where we're like big brothers and sisters. We have a very large, extensive family. And so growing up, for me, it was about those family times at Cochiti. And when we say our immediate family, because of the one, the 3 brothers and 3 sisters, it was like 40 or 50 people hanging out, having dinner every night or lunch every day, and playing together, being together. For whatever reason, my family was very encouraging to go into the mountains. I remember almost every other weekend we were in the mountains having our picnics. We call them picnics. We would camp in Bland Canyon or Cochiti Canyon. And we learned about the land. We learned about what the place meant to us. My dad, because he was still transitioning from Vietnam, he loved to be out into the mountains. Where I was always into the mountains with my dad. We would go on into the mountains, and I remember he used to take me out there. He'd make me close my eyes or put a bandana, and he'd turn me around, and he says, "Okay, honey, get us home." And that's how I learned how to look at the mountains, how to read the landscape, and about water, because the water flows downhill. So I know, like, the river's the way down there. If I follow the river or follow the stream, I know how to get home. So for me, both places had its unique features, which is really ironic because when you go to Cochiti and people think about Cochiti, many people think about Cochiti Dam. But for me, it wasn't about the dam. It wasn't about the lake. It was about all this other stuff.
One of the things in this interview process that we have explored has been the women most important to your growth and development, and why they were important. So can you give us a few examples?
Absolutely. So I was very blessed, to have both my mom's mom and my dad's mom in my life, and very much role models for me. And my mom, being a single mom and watching her juggle everything, sacrifice for me, allow me to attend and encourage me to attend Albuquerque Academy and pay for that private school education that she did on single mom's budget. Just the juggling act that she had to do, in my mind, provided me that perspective, or that notion that we can make it work, even with all the challenges. Whatever we have to juggle, we can navigate those challenges and make it happen, make it actually happen. So for my mom, I'm very much appreciative of everything she did. And the other thing, and now being a mom, hindsight 2020, but I never really recognized this growing up. But my mom, being a single mom, she never had another boyfriend, and because she wanted me to have a safe place at home. So she didn't have another boyfriend, and she never brought alcohol into our home. So I always knew her notion of, you will always have a safe place, that the home would be a safe place. And growing up now with me being a mom, that's something that I carry forward, because I always want a safe place for my my children. That, as well as my grandma from both my grandmas. Like I said, my grandma on my mom's side was very strict, and I carry that kind of traditionalistic strictness along in how I try to carry on, not necessarily telling others how they should be, but trying to live that way. Like, for example, I was telling our interns recently, if I shared with one of them, if we dance, we do everything. We prepare 4 days, and we don't cut it short and just show up the day of and just dance. There's a whole process in order to have your full presence on the day of, and whatever you're praying for, whatever is in your heart, to come to fruition. And you can only do that through the long journey it takes to prepare. And that's something my grandma taught me on my mom's side. And on my dad's side, like I shared earlier, she was the grandma of the grandmas. And everybody remembers how gracious she was, her generosity, her love, her hugs. And so I try to incorporate that. I could go off on a tangent there, but I try to incorporate that even in how I deal with business and how I deal with politicians, how I deal with folks in conflicted situations. If I'm in a meeting, I try to have that generosity, that graciousness, that respect. Communities are communities. We're human. So there would be times when so-and-so would talk bad about her. But she see them and she say, "Kuatsi," which means, "Are you, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay?" Kind of in our language. It's a show of acknowledgement of not only the person, but their spirit. And even if that person talked bad about her, she would still say, "Oh, you need help? Kuatsi, how are you today?" It wasn't like, "Oh, I'm not going to talk to them because they said something bad about me." So I try to carry that spirit forward. Mm-hmm. I rely a lot on that spirit because we all are human. We all have our pros and cons, good days, bad days, and so I try to take that into consideration as well as I deal with people.
So that's kind of the family side. Uh-huh. The other side is when you were at the academy, mm-hmm. you were very competitive, a competitive sportswoman. What did you gain from that experience?
Oh man, I love sports. Like I said, I'm daddy's girl, so me and my dad, we would play softball, baseball, basketball, soccer, run. That's a part of my life, which now as I grow up, I know I've made the realization that I have to keep a portion of that. And with my kids now, I'm able to like make a better justification in terms of my time allotment throughout the day or the week to justify, doing that. So for me, sports was essential to who Phoebe's. That's what my nickname was in high school. Phoebe's. I was Phoebe's. Who I was, and I wasn't Phoebe Suina, the Pueblo Native American girl. I was Phoebe's the basketball player, or Phoebe's the softball player, or Phoebe's the runner, or Phoebe's the soccer player. Actually going to academy, at the time I was for many years, the only Native American student in my class. So academy is upper middle class, kind of dynamic within the makeup of the student body. And so with sports, it allowed me to bring a certain trait where I wasn't excluded or because I was of a lower middle class, but I think it allowed me to be just seen as Phoebe's and not like that native girl that maybe was a token, because that's what my mom used to say. You have to do twice as good in school because people will think you were the token Native American to be let in. And so you have to do twice as good in order to just see people that you are legitimately supposed to be at this school.
It seems like you gained a lot of leadership skills.
Absolutely.
From that point in your life. Is that how you feel about that? Teamwork, independence, the kind of leadership skills that you used later on in life?
Yes. So I went into sports. I was varsity as a freshman. I was lucky to have seniors, and many of my varsity teams were seniors, but I ended up starting in a lot of roles. So, again, I was Phoebe's the freshman. I wasn't like but what it taught me and gave me, like you were asking about in terms of leadership, I'm not one of those leaders that like to stand up and say, you do this, we're going to, I feel like I'm more of a quiet leader, lead by example. And so I remember one time on the court, I think I was the captain of the team my sophomore year in basketball. And I didn't like how my coach at the time, and if she ever sees this, she's going to laugh because she'll remember it. I have a really good relationship with my coach even now, my former coach. And I didn't like how she was talking to the team. And I told her, I said, you got to respect every one of us on this team. And I was just a sophomore. Everyone on this team has a special, unique capability. So it was like the disrespect that I felt for my team members. And not for me, but for my team. And I said, you can talk to me like that, but I'm not going to let you talk to her. She challenged me to a one-on-one. And she was a Division I player, but I was so angry that we were dueling it out. She took her anger out, because we were butting heads. She made us all do wall sits, and then she made us do sprints. And she was still, and I said, "You still don't get it." And she says, "Well, if you don't like it, you can leave." So I put the ball down and I start walking off the court. She goes, "If you walk off this court, you're walking off the team." And I looked at all my team members and I started walking away. And it was about 4 of my team members came, grabbed me, and they're like, "You cannot leave, Phoebe." And I remember I looked at them. I come back to her and said, "Coach, I'm not leaving because of me. I'm not leaving because I don't want to leave my team." And then after that, then they voted me team captain. I was only a sophomore, but I think, like, for me, leadership was more about taking care of the people, taking care of those around me. There are those times, I call them opportunities. It's another way, but where even on the court, people are freaking out, or last game, I'm like, just give me the ball. It'll be all right. So I remember some heated games, and everybody would say, "Okay, we'll just get Phoebe the ball." And a senior year, my coach again, we were yelling at each other, butting heads, and I told her, "We're going to press." She said, "I'm the coach." I said, "But I'm the team captain, and I'm on the floor." I told her, I said, "We are going to press." And sure enough, she said, "Fine, do what you want." And so I said, "Okay, team, we're going to press. We're going to do a full court press, and we're going to get back in this game." And sure enough, we did. And then we got third. It was for the third place game, but she still recalls that to this day. I talked to her about a month ago, and she says, "Then I knew you were the leader of that team, and I knew the team was in good hands." And I hope my staff now, I try to include everybody, and I try to bring up people instead of like being a leader that has to push people down in order to lead. I want everybody to be brought up. And I don't have to be the leader. If somebody else in a situation needs to be the speaker, then absolutely put the player in that needs to be in.
When you were exploring your identity in your early years, what did you uncover or discover about yourself?
Wow. I think for me, it was actually going to college where I realized I was a Native American Pueblo woman. In high school and growing up, I was just Phoebe's. So I didn't really think about the Pueblos. I didn't really think about my Native identity. Looking back at my younger years, I don't know how I did not think about that. But in college, there was one time, so I rode crew my freshman year. And this is a funny story too. I rode crew because I wanted to play basketball. I wanted to be a walk-on. But the coach on the basketball team said, "Oh, no, we don't need you. We already have a guard." So, well, I can be a shooting guard. No, we already got a shooting guard. Like, okay. I come to find out that she did that with a number of minority students. So it wasn't that, it was just me. I said, I can't play basketball, so what am I going to do? And I love sports. So I'll go out to the crew. And the coach said, "You're too short. You're not going to make a boat." The ladies that row crew are like 6 feet, and she's like, "And you've never rowed in your life?" I'm like, "Right, I just did those rowing machines in the gym." And she said, "You're too short, you won't make the boat." And then to me, that like flipped a switch, and I said, "Watch me, I'm gonna make a boat." So I rowed crew my freshman, and the reason why this is important is crew in the Northeast is like a big thing. It's a big sport. It's a big sport for colleges in the Northeast, for those boarding schools in the Northeast. So it's that upper middle class of students that row crew. So they're not exposed to Native American, Indian country. So one morning, I made the boat, so I made it to winter practice, winter season. And we were rowing on the ergs, and we had just finished out practice, and one of the young ladies comes up to me. She says, "I found out you're Native American, and you're 100%." And then another lady comes up. She says, "You're 100%? Do you live in a teepee?" And it seems stereotypical, but that's what they asked me. And I said, well, yeah, I'm 100%, and my mom's 100% South Lady. My dad's 100% South. So I guess I'm 100%. And I had like 30 team members like come up to me, "Can we touch you? We've never," like I was something in a museum or something. That for me, that moment, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I never felt this before." And it was that realization that, oh, I guess I am this person on the outside. This is what people see. For me, going out to Dartmouth was that realization of who I was, what I carried. And Dartmouth was hard because it was so far away. It was a different environment, different society, different climate. I mean, everything. And it made me appreciate what we have here in the Pueblos and what we have here in terms of our traditions and culture.
In several of the things that we've read is that your interest in math and science seemed to come early in life. And I suspect that's because of your dad and taking you out into the landscape and showing you those kinds of things. But how did you get interested in engineering as a career?
In high school, I loved physics, I loved math, I loved chemistry, I loved calculus, which is weird for most people, but I love it. Coming out of high school, I got the AT&T Bell Lab Scholarship, which was a full scholarship to anywhere in the whatever institution I wanted to go to. I also received the Moorhead Award, and that was for the University of North Carolina, but you had to go to UNC for that award. Unfortunately, when I went to go visit, it was actually that high school tournament, basketball tournament. I went late because we had to finish up that game. I said, I have to finish up the game and I'll go visit UNC, and they have like a whole weekend there at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. When I was finished with that visit, and it was kind of like the interview process to see who was going to get the Moorhead Award, and it's a very unique kind of prestigious award. But when I went out there and I was getting ready to, I'm a basketball person, so of course you're at UNC, you're at Duke, that's like basketball capital right there. So I was in the local college bookstore looking at shorts and paraphernalia, and I was walking through the store, and there was a older lady behind me, and I thought, oh, you want to go by? I'm sorry, I'm in your way. She said no. So I like keep walking, and then I get to another section. She's still right there. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I keep getting in your way. You want to pass?" She's like, "No." And I said, well, she's like, "Oh no, I'm just waiting for you to steal something so I can watch you." And I was like, okay. It was blatant racism that I have never felt ever. Even though I did get that award, I didn't go there. So, but part of the scholarship that I did get was for engineering. So it was an engineering specific scholarship. And I kind of knew going in, because I love physics, I loved math, that's what I wanted to be, was an engineer. And I did an internship for Sandia National Laboratories my high school year, and I loved it. It was a materials engineering internship, and I loved it. So I said, okay, I'm going to be an engineer. I thought I was going to be a materials engineer or a chemical, because I love chemistry too, chemical engineer. But it was actually when I came home my sophomore year, I came home from college. And again, hindsight 2020, I didn't really realize all the factors that resulted in me coming home. I had a friend from Albuquerque. He had committed suicide that fall term when I was in my sophomore year. It was a hard winter out there, and then I was taking extra special hard classes. So I took about 6 months off after my sophomore year. And I came home to Cochiti. I helped take care of my two little nephews. They were both only two, and I got reintegrated into Cochiti. When I was there, the lieutenant governor that year asked if I wanted to do a special project on the dam. And I started reading about the dam, and I started reading about what the Army Corps did, the process they did, and the threats they exerted over Cochiti to get that dam in. Threats of condemnation of land, destruction of particular sacred areas. And I thought, I want Cochiti to have somebody that understands these engineering drawings, that understands these documents, so that we have somebody to advocate. So after I took that little break, I said, whatever it takes. It's cold, it's far, it's hard, tough curriculum, all-nighters. I said, but I'm going to get my undergrad and I'm going to get my graduate degree. I'm just going to suck it up and get it done and come home. And that's what spurred my focus in water and in engineering.
Since your business is water management, and that seems to be a very male-dominated profession, what are the problems that you face both as a woman and as a Native person in this field?
It is a male-dominated and white-dominated field. For me, it's being heard. Even being at the table or being allowed at the table. If there's a decision-making meeting to happen, it's whether I'm smart enough or good enough or even qualified to be there. Those are some of the challenges. And then with water here in New Mexico, and in New Mexico being a male-dominated leadership, we do have a new governor, Governor Grisham, that's female, but normally it's been male governors in leadership and males in leadership positions. It's often also walking that line of and balancing of knowing when to speak, how to speak, and being prepared. So even if I'm not at the table, I'm still doing my homework in the corner, so that when I do get the opportunity, it might not be in the next minute, it might not be in the next hour, it might be like 5 months down the road, I will have done my homework to be prepared, so when I do get the opportunity, I can make the most of it. I've talked to a lot of women in business and in the field, and I see differences in how they approach it. So when I worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, I had a great mentor. Her name was Beverly Ramsey. She was head of one of the divisions of that Los Alamos. She's actually a Cherokee from North Carolina area. So she was my mentor as I was a graduate research advisor at Los Alamos. She came in there more of kind of a bull in a china shop. No one was going to mess with her. And so it was kind of more harsh. And then I've seen leaders where their boss says to do, and they're more kind of like the gopher type, get favors in that way. What I like to look at is trying to, again, not force myself, but not be a suck up, but be there because of what I have up here, what I have in here, and with a good heart and good intentions. Where that, again, the intentions is for the people and for the land and the air and the water. If I feel like if I can carry that, and again, sometimes you're in an awkward situation where you're forced to either stand up for yourself or one of my other mentors and from the SBA program, the way she likes to look at it is you're able to graciously bend without breaking, to be strong without breaking. And so if you're solid concrete, you can break. You need to be like a big tree, right? And you can bend a little bit when the wind comes and pushes you, but you're gonna be strong enough to stay standing. In those areas when being in a male-dominated and non-native dominated field, that's what helps me out.
I've been interested in your perceptions of what is the biggest concern in New Mexico for Native projects that you work on.
Wow. It's the federal. It's the federal administration. And again, I try to be respectful of everybody and, respectful of a person. But the current president has severely eroded the political stability and stance of our tribal governments and our tribes by just small changes in how language and words are interpreted, policies being developed, and the appointment of the federal court system. And judges, how executive orders are coming out, changes in federal law that the Congress is passing. For me, that's a big threat because it's a threat to our lands, our water, our air, our people in all facets. And so it's a huge concern, even though way out here in New Mexico, we're thousands of miles from DC, but it's going to have rippling effects. Even if he does not get elected in 2020, whatever has been done in this 4 years is going to have long-term effects, especially in the federal court system, because Native American rights and laws, water rights, are eventually, they have to be adjudicated within the federal court system. And with the judges appointed being very conservative, again, just trying to be very diplomatic, conservative, and have come from a very hardline perspective without fully recognizing the political stance of tribes across the nation and what that means for our way of life, our water rights, and our air, and our how we take care of the people going forward.
In many ways, it gets in the way of tribal sovereignty.
Absolutely. Absolute. Tribal sovereignty is one of the things that is being severely eroded, again, just by small nuances in how language is interpreted, how in some instances, like in the healthcare system, that tribes or Native American is seen as a race versus a political entity in terms of tribes. That small change is having ripple effects on how federal policies and funding can be done. And to me, that goes contrary to their federal trust responsibility, whether through treaty rights or whether through just the general federal trust responsibility to Native Americans.
Your company has a big role in the consultation process and in compromises that need to be made. When taking on a project like this and you have so many stakeholders, how do you pivot to get a reasonable conclusion?
It's very hard. And again, just always trying to respect everybody at the table, respect their being and their person and their spirit, right? So coming from those core values and core tenets and principles, sometimes you have to take it all the way to those core values and principles, because what is the right thing to do? That's ultimately what I try to communicate and bring a consensus. So even if we talk about how do we take care of a child, like what's happening on the border, what's going on right now is not the right thing to do. Can we all agree that to stick a kid away from its mother, 2-year-old kid in a cage, is not the right thing to do? Okay, let's start with that core fact. Are we on consensus? So it's identifying points or areas of consensus that we can start from, and then we can say, okay, well, what do we need to do to make it right? If we all agree that it's wrong. I was just talking with the BLM and with the BIA over these last few days. Said, black and white. You get a lawyer to look at a 1-page document, 10 lawyers. They will all have 10 different interpretations of what's on that paper, even though it's in black and white. But remember, federal law and Indian law, what's in black and white, if there's ambiguity, must be interpreted to benefit the tribe. That's one of the canons and basics, principles of Indian law. So, back to a page, 10 different lawyers, which interpretation therefore benefits the tribe the best? So when I deal with federal policy, that's what I ask BLM. Let's go to those basics. Federal law, interpretation, we all can interpret it. Everybody will have a different interpretation. But it goes back to those core basics. Okay, can we come to consensus on those core basics? Then let's move forward and analyze and go backwards. That's what I try to do. In some sense, to metaphors. Back to like that example I brought up about the child. We can all agree to stick a 2-year-old little kid away from his mother in a cage is not the right thing to do. Can we all agree? Okay. we're all in agreement, right? Okay. Now let's work backwards. So it's that same perspective. You know, talking to BLM the other day, I said, our people have been on this landscape for thousands of years. Since time immemorial is the term that's used. A federal employee who just got here has just been deployed. They've been here for 30 days. In reality, how many more years are you going to be here? Maybe a year or two. Okay. So we have been here since time immemorial, and we will be here for thousands of years. And your little time here is less than a little blip on this time scale. But in your little blip of time, you have the ability to interpret the paper, the black and white, in the best interests of the tribe. As a federal employee. So either you can help us or make it hard. It's your choice. And you find it in your heart as to what you think is the right thing to do.
Or at least in consultation.
Absolutely.
That's often what gets lost in the discussion.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody asks me, well, what's tribal consultation? Ultimately, it's going to the tribe, talking with the tribe, and finding out what the right thing to do is. Basic.
From your own experience, how would you advise young people, especially women, about the need for mentors and how to find them?
I would advise young women to absolutely find those mentors. Look for, and they're all around us. You know, you asked me the question earlier. I can think of dozens of people that I look up to. And nobody's perfect, right? And also to have that recognition, even if you have a role model and they're not perfect, you still can take the beauty of those things that maybe even are imperfections to bolster your perspective and how you want to carry out your life and learn from them. And how do you find them? It's like, one, always have respect for your elders and respect for everybody. And those people that come into your life and are willing to bring gifts, but what I mean by gifts is not maybe something material, but knowledge, gifts of graciousness, generosity, all of those traits that you can't spend millions of dollars, you can't spend money to get. And there is, I think, more value in that. Like when I talk to my daughter, of course she's my little one, and I hope she sees me as a role model and somebody that she can look up to. But I always tell her, it's not just me. I got a lot of women in our community and people, not just women, to look up to. But always remember that we are all human. We have imperfections. We make mistakes, and have that empathy and sympathy to not expect perfection.
But that's a really important point too.
Right. Right.
You know, if you're disappointed with someone,
right.
Is it because they're only human?
Right.
Or is it really egregious? You have to learn to make those kinds of distinctions.
Absolutely. So. And then to always just respect everybody. Kohati, are you in the village, how are you? That's basically what that means. My boyfriend Rex, he was raised by his grandparents, and his grandfather lived into his hundreds. So I always tell him he didn't have the pleasure or benefit of going to college, but I tell him he has a PhD in our way of life, because he can't pay for that education. Yeah. And one of the things that we talk about is, in terms of what you're asking, the role models and those people in our lives, they will show up when they're needed. We tell our kids, like, if somebody's trying to give you knowledge and you don't tell them, I know. Because when you say that, you cut it off. You say, okay, you know everything then. Okay, I don't need to say anything more. Because we don't know everything. We're always learning. And that's what my grandfather on my dad's side taught me. He was learning till his mid-90s. He learned how to trade stocks and bonds when he was 92 years old. So I don't know. He looked at the newspaper for 20 years, and he learned how to track stocks and bonds. And when he was 92, asked me to come over and help him move money from one stock to another. It's like, so being a forever learner, and that's what we try to tell our kids, is be a forever learner. Nobody will ever know everything.
Yeah. How do you define your role as a Pueblo woman representative of your community?
Wow, that's a tough one.
What does it mean to be a Pueblo woman in your community?
I'm always grappling with what I personally feel are my responsibilities as a Pueblo woman in the community. My business mentor, one time I was telling her, I said, I'm sorry I'm running late. I had to go bake bread, and then I had to make sure the kids are ready, and I had to make sure my dad was okay, all these things. And then I had to make sure the business that we made payroll, all of these things. And to me, when I walked in, and I share this story because it's going to answer the question, but I share it because I walked in, I'm telling her, Wendy, I got all these things, I apologize, I was late. And she said, that says to me you have a balanced life. And I looked at her and go, how does that? She says, because you can't be all one thing. You're not just a mom. You're not just a daughter. You're not just a partner. You're not just a Pueblo woman. You're not just a businesswoman. You're all these things. You're not over on any of them. You're like all of them. I share that because I'm always grappling with what I feel is my responsibility as a Pueblo woman, as somebody from the Pueblo. And that's to be present when things go on. And that is hard, because things are always going on, right? But not just present physically, like in mind, heart, and physical body. And sometimes that's hard too. It's being present and being able to be there and participate when you are present. It goes back to like kind of like my grandma said, is like if your whole heart's not in it and you didn't go through this whole process, then it's not really there at all. It's like kind of half doing everything. And so I'm always grappling with that. To be a Pueblo representative and a female, I think for me it's to do my best to be present, to participate, to be involved in the community. But the other hat that I am blessed to wear, but also it's a added responsibility, is because of my education, is to try to communicate to the outside world with our perspective, of our Pueblo perspective, without compromising the sacred nature of what we believe in our spirit. With that added hat, I always find myself sometimes in a like tightrope situation where I have to be respectful. I can't say too much. I always have to know that I'm not a Pueblo leader in the sense of a war chief or a governor or that leadership. And I always ask for permission if I'm being requested to speak on behalf or for the Pueblo. I was involved in a lawsuit, helping the Pueblo with the Las Conchas fire lawsuit. I can share this. I knew about the flooding, the fire, I knew about all the resources, I knew about what should be done because of my work about Los Alamos, I knew about the technical nature, I knew about the federal resources that could be used, and all of that had to be captured as part of this lawsuit. And we went into counsel, and the lawyer, our legal counsel for Cochise, said, well, we need to have a representative at the table. They're like, oh, well, how about, and I'm just naming names, I'm just like saying, you know, Mr. John over there, how about him? Because he's a council member, he can represent the tribe. But the lawyer wasn't from the area, and he was like, well, so he brought out all these binders. He goes, okay, well, let me put it this way. Whoever you pick has to know all these binders like the back of their hand. And all the council members are looking at each other like, and so basically what he was saying it, so he goes, and he says, well, there is somebody in this room that does know all the binders like the back of their hand. She's over there. And I'm like, but I knew what he was saying, and I knew what the council was grappling with. Like, she can't be our representative because she's a female. She's not on tribal council. The compromise was another council member will always go with me as we spoke on behalf of, and the governor, of course, will go with me to. How I handled it is every time I spoke on behalf of the Pueblo, I would ask the permission from the governor, respectfully, and from the tribal council member, and ask for the ability to speak. Well, one, to, it's hard to interpret, but kind of like the permission, but also the forgiveness of, to speak, and then allow them to say yay or nay to go forward. And if they gave me that permission, I would speak, and then I would give it back to them.
The complexity is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and then that's what we do in our way, but it was awkward like that.
But it's better to know the rules.
And they're not
what
written
you can
anywhere,
and you can't do.
right?
Yeah,
They're not written. So again, that's one of those traditional protocols that gets shared orally, that is not written anywhere. But it's a very, like you were just, complex but informal process. How do people know about that process? It's through education on a daily basis.
And they're lucky to have you as that educator. I just had one last question. Is there anything we haven't asked you that you'd like to add or talk about?
I just wanted to add one of the things, I think, back to the mission or your objective, is in my education, in my traditional education and my formal education, kind of melding the two together, looking at women's roles within our tribal communities. Here in the Pueblos in particular, just how I understand how our current traditional societies are, how history has happened to our Pueblos and our people. In my Pueblos, the clan system goes through the mother. So my kids have my clan, which is Turkey. And that goes through my mom and my grandma on that side. So the females have always had a very strong role in our Pueblo communities. Just knowing our history and the influences of the Spanish and the Mexican governments, one of the things that I think was one of the repercussions of that was, in essence, the pushing down or pushing to the side of the female, because those two forms of government are very male dominated. Where machismo, machoism actually comes, the root is back in the Middle East. That term, right? So, and what goes on in the Middle East to this day, and women are very highly disrespected in the Middle East to this day. Many countries, they don't have status to even be educated or even go outside their home. So if we look at that connection and look how when our people here in the Pueblos were impacted, the community saw women, and I'm blessed, my partner, he's very respectful of women, and so was his grandfather. So let me put it in his grandfather's terms is, we can't have life without women. That's back to, okay, let's go back to consensus. We cannot have life without women because the women are the bearers of life. So why do we disrespect women? Or why do we put them to the side? And I think our Pueblo culture didn't do that, but it was a large influence of the Mexican and the Spanish government that changed on how our governmental structures saw women within our Pueblo communities. And I don't think we ever really reconciled that or really realized that amongst our Pueblo communities. And each Pueblo, each tribe has been affected differently and then evolved differently. But when you look at these core concepts, we come to consensus. The clans go through the women. They must be of a special purpose, right? The women are the bearers of life. And so through my boyfriend Rex's grandfather would always say, we must respect women. We must also include them in our discussions because they have a different perspective than what men have. So it's not to exclude, but it is to be inclusive and not to think that you have power over them. His grandpa would say, well, if all the women didn't want to have babies, we won't have a community. Unless we made, and so, it's a power thing. And I think within our Pueblo communities and our women, we have a power. But back to my grandma, it's how we carry it and how we share it as well. And so in terms of this project, I think as women get educated and women have something different to bring back than what was brought back in the last 50 years or 70 years in terms of education and our roles in the community and our voice, I think one of the things that could be remembered or revitalized is women did have a purpose. We did have a place. We did have an essential role in how community and a perspective and how our Pueblo communities went forward. And how do we revitalize that, I guess, is the best way I can put it.
Well, that's a great way to end end the interview with a question.
Uh-huh.
So thank you very much, and we appreciate you taking the time
Sure.
to do this.
Sure.
It was fun.